Hello everyone, my name's Chris Ratcliff. I work in IT, been working in security now for the best part of a bit over a decade, feels like a lot longer, and risk is something that I basically work with every single day. And what I found sort of quite interesting is you work with risk, but then it bleeds into your everyday life, which is why I've got the talk working with risk, but actually it's how I stopped worrying and just started connecting things to the internet. So, we're going to start with a little audience participation, which is just what you need first thing in the morning. So who here would connect, sorry, I'm bound by the microphone, so I can't walk too far this way. Who here would connect their phone to the internet? Who's not putting their hands up? You're either very, very paranoid or you're lying. Okay, most of you. However you fancy. Who here would connect a cheap Chinese CCTV system with 2-year-old firmware to the internet? Good.
Whose internet connection?
Very good point. What about a barbecue? Who would connect a barbecue to the internet? Why? That's exactly the point. This is this is Wi-Fi barbecue. You buy it, you stick it in the garden, you put a lump of meat on it for like 6 or 8 hours, and you come up with a lovely sort of tasty feast at the end of it, hopefully. If you're doing this with charcoal on a sort of normal barbecue, you're out there every few hours, you're there prodding and poking, and when the weather's like this, you really don't want to be. So, they've put Wi-Fi into this, so I can sit inside or be in bed, nice and dry, and I can check if it's done, I can adjust it, all of this good stuff from wherever I want to be. And in fact, with this one, they've even got a cloud back end, and as it says, welcome to the future of barbecue. Now, you all made the point. Why? What's the point? I want to. This is the thing. This is my use case. The fact that other people have different views, I kind of don't care about because this is what I want. But then we get to Goldblum's law, where people just connect stuff up for the sake of it. And how many times have we looked at stuff? We looked at products, we looked around somebody's house, they've got a thing plugged in, and you're going, why? Why did somebody think that was a good idea? Why are you putting Wi-Fi and a web server into a washing machine or a coffee machine? Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. It's like the compass that used to get on children's shoes certainly when I was young. But like, what's the point of a compass on the sole of your shoe? But it was, somebody went, we can do this, so they did. But one of the big problems with risk is that it's rarely a unilateral decision. And it's rarely also straightforward. I mean, if there's no downside to something, it's not a risk. If there's no downside, you just do it. So, as soon as we, as security people, start going, why would you want to do that? That's stupid. It starts becoming them and us. We start putting that kind of roadblock between the people that we're actually trying to convince to do something or not do something. And, excuse me. Okay. And I think there's a very big, sometimes sort of misconception with people, particularly outside the industry, that the role of security is to stop things happening. And I very much look at it the other way around. I look at security's job is to allow things to happen. It's easy to not do anything. You just turn this off. You just unplug it. You just never store data and you don't have to protect it. But if you want something to happen, how can you do it securely? For everyone who's ever been through an airport, this doesn't look like an environment where things are being permissioned. But this is the point. People who go through an airport security area, the primary function of this is not to turn people away. primary function is to say, okay, you've got a boarding pass, you're allowed to be airside, you're not contravening any regulations, you're not carrying anything too ridiculous, through you go. And if you don't meet those rules, then you get blocked. Essentially, it's a big human firewall, but a lot more obnoxious. So who here has seen this sort of thing before? Yeah. Who thinks they are pointless and stupid and objects of ridicule? Who here thinks they're actually quite useful?
The parents.
Exactly. The internet has an opinion. Who would have thought? Which is basically this. But what that fails to understand is that there are multiple use cases. Password managers, I'm sure a lot of us use password managers, are fantastic and they work on every device and they automatically log you in and they can cycle your passwords, all of this great stuff. If that works for you. If it doesn't, maybe something like this. You get to write down your password, you get to keep them long, bundle in a bit of advice about how to use it. This works for people that password managers might not. And people go, oh yeah, but it's not as good. But we're not talking about one best solution or nothing. This exists alongside, this is an option. So this is one option, password manager is another option. No password management whatsoever is a third option. And to be honest, between this and nothing, I'd kind of take this. On Android, certainly. But the important thing is as well is that the two are not better or worse than each other, they're different. Because something like this, you can't scrape it over the internet, you can't have it harvested, but you've got to be more aware of your physical security. Maybe not write things down quite as clearly as people might want to could take it. But it's different. For this almost works as, I won't say an analogy for people. If people are forced to have something that they don't want and that doesn't work for them, they won't use it. Give them something that works for them, and you're just nudging things up. Now, the problem with risk is that it's very, very difficult to specifically quantify. You can look at it, as a general guide, I kind of sort of start working from here. So, if something were to happen, how severe is it going to be? How severe is it going to be? How likely is it going to be? The more likely it is, and the more severe it is, we should probably do something about it. So this might be sticking all of your stuff in an AWS bucket and thinking it's probably okay because Amazon know what they're doing, right? But then down here, you've got an encrypted password database. So something that's full of user logins, but they're all encrypted and salted and hashed and all of that good stuff. And you protect it deeply within a business. So it's not very likely, and if you do lose it, it's gobbledygook. Kind of doesn't matter. It's worth noting, particularly in about the last 5 years or so, likelihood... Sorry, I gave it carried away with the laser pointer. Likelihood is really tied to one thing for me, and that's automation. AWS buckets are a great example because people can scan them en masse. They are scanning them en masse. And they will look for anything they can retrieve out of them. And it's very easy for somebody to do it and just leave it running. The more people scan it, the more likely it is that somebody's going to find something. It almost goes back to the example that we had a moment ago with the password manager, with the password manager book. Take that out of the online world, and suddenly instead of everyone on the planet potentially being able to access it, you're down to 5, 10, maybe. This is obviously subjective. One of the big steps, once you've got a use case, is to fully understand it. Because what might be severe to you is actually not very severe to somebody else. So you need to discuss, you need to communicate, you need to understand, so that you both have a full picture of what's actually going on. You can do this through face-to-face discussions, through tabletop exercises, and it's very important that you both understand it in the same language as well. Because that example I gave moments ago, where I said, password database gets stolen. Some people will hear that and go, oh God, our password database is going to be in the news, it's going to be terrible, we're going to have fines and penalties and all this sort of thing. And you go, well, yes, but it's encrypted. So don't worry, it's actually not as bad as you think. But we both need to understand that it's actually the same level of severity. One thing, for anybody who ever discusses risk, be it at work, be it here, be it with relatives, be it with friends or whatever, please don't use one word. Just. Because just comes in really two forms. So one is, can you just? Which is usually sort of, can you just hack this password? Can you just break into this database? And it's just really demeans what they think you're actually able to do and the amount of skill you've got. The other is, I'll just. Unless you are literally logging onto a box, clicking a button and logging off, to say, oh, I'll just stand up that infrastructure, I'll just reboot all those servers, I'll just log on a Sunday and patch it all, it'll be fine. Let me give you an example. If you say, how to defuse a bomb. 1, find a bomb. 2, just defuse the bomb. 3, tea and medals. That completely undermines how dangerous, how difficult that job is. Unless you're going for some sort of mass hyperbole, best avoid it, because it doesn't teach me anything about what it takes, and it doesn't imbue that person with the appropriate amount of respect, to be honest. If you're old like me as well, somebody might say, how do you use Snapchat? The answer, of course, is that you just use Snapchat. I put my number in, I don't get it. So, going back to our barbecue. I've said that I want it, and we go, okay, what's the downside? What's the attack surface? So, functional misuse is always my favourite. If you ever see a story in the news about IoT, what I call functional misuse is always the first thing that they go to, which is, if you use it as it is intended to be used, what can you do? And there was a news story where it said, smart thermostats, you could hack them, and people could adjust your heating. This could cost people tens of pounds a year. And you're like, you're really not thinking outside the box. So with this, what can you do? You can change the temperature. You can use up my fuel, turn it off, overcook my tea, basically spoil my day. But if it runs out of fuel, it will turn itself off. It's very hard to make it kind of combust or do anything too dangerous because they've thought of that. People tend to drink beer while they're using these, so you need to have the safety guards in there. But let's take it a step further. What could you do with the actual hardware? Infrastructure misuse. Get access to the underlying OS. Remember, this communicates with the cloud services, so there's an API in there. Maybe there are calls that aren't documented. Maybe there's authorization issues between the cloud and the barbecue. Here's a sentence I never thought I'd hear in a talk. Using a barbecue to attack other LAN devices. If anybody can buy one of these, take it to bits, see what it can do, and submit a talk to like DEF CON for like, my food is tasty, but my data is gone. That would be fantastic. So, are we happy, or am I happy, with these downsides against the upside of having my new shiny toy that I want to play with? And we get onto a thing called risk appetite. Now, let's have a scenario. I give you £100,000 and say, right, take it away. Give it back to me in a week. If you do that, I will give you £5,000. Hopefully all of you will be going, that doesn't sound right, but stick with it. Your choices are, 1, you stick all the money under your bed in a shoebox, hope nobody steals it. You spend 0 money, but if it gets stolen, you're on the hook for 100 grand. Not great. Option 2, you spend £1,000 securing it. Buy a safe. Maybe screw it into the wall, screw it into the floor, cement it in concrete, whatever takes your fancy. And you think, okay, I'm going to spend £1,000 and I get £5,000. So, 4 grand. Take that. There's a chance that it might get stolen, but there's less chance than if I just leave it on the kitchen work surface. Or you go, you know what? I'm really quite risk averse. So what I'm going to do is I'll take that £100,000, I'll put it in a safe, I'll get a security guard in front of it, I'll get 2 security guards, and then they can watch each other. And I'll put a CCTV system in, and in fact, actually, we'll have it at a secure location as well. So it's going to be absolutely there, and I'll be really confident that when it's the end of the week, that £100,000 is still there. Except that will cost you £10,000. £10,000 out, £5,000 in. You're not going to do it. And this is risk appetite. So it's how much risk are you willing to take before it's either too much or actually not enough. And saying to security people, that's not enough risk, sounds quite counterintuitive. But the more you protect something, you get into the law of diminishing returns, and it becomes increasingly expensive to get a very, very small increase in protection. So, this is quite an easy example because as soon as you put numbers around something, you go A minus B equals C, yeah, tick, or no, cross. Think about, though, you've got £100,000 in your house. Who knows there's £100,000 in your house? Maybe the person who asked you is a little bit dubious. Maybe their friends are a bit dubious and they know where you live. Maybe it's a criminal scheme and you don't want your name getting into the newspaper as somebody who aids and abets criminals. So we've now gone from, instead of just a simple maths equation, we're now starting to deal with reputation. We're now starting to deal with anxiety. We're now starting to lead with those things which are intangible, but they're quite kind of primal. Because, like Freeclan and Jess were saying, we're kind of programmed to deal with risk. We do risky things. We drink and we cross the road and we undercook food. But we have to have some sense of, is it going to kill us? Is it going to keep me up at night? Or actually, am I okay with it? And this gets really difficult if you're trying to actually quantify this with somebody, because we get emotional. And emotional responses in the brain can easily overpower the higher functions, the logic functions. Again, got to thank Freaking Jess for their talk leading nicely into mine. It's great having them as a warm-up. So, if you ever deal with risk, and you deal with fear, and you deal with things that are ephemeral, that it's difficult to attach a pound amount to, you are going to very, very quickly get into the emotional argument. I'd love to say there's an easy way of dealing with it. If you find a way of quantifying that, you will make an absolute fortune. Because God knows, all of those data breaches where 3 million accounts here and God knows what else over there get breached and the fine is trivial, if we could put a dollar amount against that, I would be very happy indeed. So, risk appetite. Risk appetite's kind of an interesting one because you say, as soon as you say, okay, well, we want 0 breaches, Is that actually feasible? Let me give you an example. Who here would consider themselves a red team? One. Maybe the other ones are just sort of keeping their head down and keeping the powder dry. Who is also more on the defensive side, on the kind of the SOC side of things? A few more. Risk. So for the red teamers particularly, risk is a great thing to play with because risk isn't zero sum. It's not one person has it and therefore the other person doesn't. It can be very, very asymmetric. Let me give you an example. Phishing attacks. If you're trying to get somebody to click a link, you want to launch a phishing attack, there's my thing. So from a red team point of view, it's low risk. Who really investigates phishing attacks? Particularly at scale. There's too many. Might get caught, might get dropped. That's kind of the end of it. But it's high scale, it's easy to automate. We're back to the likelihoods scale. And if you're throwing out 10,000 emails, 100,000 emails, what you're trying to do is you're trying to second guess a user. So it's, what can I do, whether it's one person, whether it's 1,000 people, what can I put in that somebody will click on? And you can use fear, you can use optimism, you can use financial, sexual, encouragement, whatever you think people will respond to in that situation. Target success rate, 0.1%, 0.1% to about 1%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you send an organisation 1,000 emails and 10 people click on it, there's 10 opportunities to get something into their network. From the defensive point of view, however, it's quite different. Because this is actually quite a cheap attack, quite low risk. If you're on the defensive side, high risk. Because you don't know if any of those get through and they get clicked on, what it's going to deploy. And it's high scale. In fact, if you're a big organisation, you're not dealing with one opponent. You're dealing with several opponents who are all trying to do the same thing. And this is where it gets particularly tricky because, as I was saying earlier, one of the things with risk is it's about understanding, it's about discussing and having a mutual understanding and awareness of what's involved. Essentially, we're talking about empathy. So, in the case of the red team column, it's, okay, I get an email, what would make me click on a link? For the blue team, they're trying to second guess what an attacker would do to second guess what a user would do. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to kind of go, okay, well, if I was going to write a phishing attack and I knew that it was being sent to our users, then I know that this sort of thing might think, and you just spiral into a huge number of possibles. But what's your target? 0. How much does it cost to get to a case where you absolutely have 0 phishing emails being clicked on? Huge amount. But that's always going to be the challenge. So we then start saying, okay, we know the positives of a use case, we know the negatives of a use case. What can we do? Everything okay? Okay. What can we do to try and make things a bit better? So essentially what we're talking about is mitigation. Back to our work. Some obvious things. So in the case of this particular barbecue, you can look at it and go, okay, it's a trusted vendor. This isn't just shipped in from who knows where, written by who knows what. Regular firmware updates. You unplug it. You don't keep it plugged in all the time, probably. So your time to potentially attack it is limited. It uses WPA2 for Wi-Fi connections, which is pretty good. What you might say as well is, actually, do you want details outside the house, or do you just want to be able to be in the living room and that be outside? So stop it reaching the internet at all. Maybe have dedicated VLAN so it can only get out to the internet, it can't see or attack all of your stuff. You're probably looking at that going, yeah, sounds pretty obvious. Difficult here is that that's not a bad bit of kit, so it's pretty straightforward. But what is intuitive for us in this room and in this community, these are the sorts of things that we think about quite a lot, because this is, how do we make something possible? If we do all of this, we're happy for this to go ahead. We're trying to make sure that this security is used here to allow something to happen and not be a reason to stop it. Because frankly, how many times have people seen, you can't use a password manager because of security, you can't do this because of security, we won't tell you how to do that because of security. And you're like, that doesn't tell me anything, that doesn't give me a reason to better understand what you're trying to tell me. Frankly, it just sounds like an excuse. And bear in mind as well, imagine this is our Chinese CCTV system. What mitigations would you do then? You know, you've got a fixed admin password, you've got who knows what support, who knows what firmware updates. So you go, well, actually, you know what? I'm not going to have it at home or in the office. Maybe we'll put it on a separate test network. Maybe we'll put it on its own ISP connection. You know what? Maybe we cannot mitigate this to a point where we're happy. We just go, you know what? Let's just get rid. It's not worth it. If you guys and girls are anything like me, and you probably are, I love plugging stuff into the internet. If something can be plugged into the internet and I've bought it and it has that capability, I will plug it in to see what it does, even when it's useless. I've done it with tellies and DVD recorders and stuff, and it's just, most of the time it is just completely rubbish, but I do it because it's there. But in my head, I can get to a point where I'm happy that it's not going to compromise anything. But humans, as a species, are really bad at quantifying risk. We kind of do it intuitively because we don't want to be eaten by a lion or fall out of a tree or something. But we're actually quite bad at being able to sort of go, yes, this is higher than this, and that's very small, and this is very large. Particularly as well because we do things repeatedly and we become comfortable with risk. So there's me plugging stuff in. The more stuff I plug into the internet at home, I still haven't been hacked, so I must be doing something right, and I keep plugging it in, and if something happens, I'll be like, oh, that didn't happen all the times before. Can't be my fault. Because the risk each time is different, but I get so used to it. Crossing the road, quite dangerous thing to do, but you do it all the time and you get used to it. So you don't think of it necessarily as a risky activity. So we've got, let me give you an example. So if you want to know how bad we are at qualifying risk as humans, here's 20 coins. And I'm going to say to you, these are all perfectly random. So, no trickery, there's no hidden thing here. 20 coins, all perfectly random. If you stake £1 and you flip all of them and they land all on heads, you'll win £50,000. Okay? Who would do that? Yeah, bit of fun. The odds of you doing that roughly are about 1 in a million, a little bit over. So, in order to guarantee that you win £50,000, you must be prepared to spend £1 million to do it. But some of you will be going, aha, but each time you do it is a discrete event, and one event doesn't have a reaction on the other, so you could win on the first go, or you could win on the millionth go. So, okay. So on average, let's say you'll probably win at about halfway. So now you're down to spending £500,000 to win 50,000. But it doesn't feel that ridiculous. because you'll do it and you won't miss a couple of quid out your pocket, and you'll go on your day on your way, and you'll probably forget about it. But here's the big challenge with an activity like this is if you say, okay, for me, use case is trivial. Won't make much difference to my life. Won't really think about it afterwards, unless I win, and then I'll remember it for a long time. But what about other use cases? What about other people? How would they respond to it? So this is a graph from World Bank, which shows population who live in extreme poverty. You can see particularly, where's my thing now? There it is. So particularly here, sort of Central Africa, this is the percentage of the population who live per head on $1.90 a day or less. So suddenly, you're thinking, I'm not just gambling with pocket change here. Suddenly, a couple of goes at this, and that's somebody's life for a day. How would they respond to this? So it can be very easy to always look at things from your own experience and bring with it all your own preconceptions and all your own experience and all your own how comfortable you are, particularly with risk and particularly with whether you're a risky person or a conservative person or whatever. The trick, really, more than anything, when it comes to dealing with other people and dealing with risk, is to be able to look at it from their point of view. What's pushing their buttons? Why do they want to do it? How can we make it happen? With that, I appreciate this is a little bit of a short talk. Do we have any questions? Stunned silence.
Quick question about you put the graph up forward, omega worries. So I've been at ISO 27 lead auditor.
Yeah.
It landed on my desk to produce that graph for the company. And one of the problems I had was risk changes around the board of directors. So the finance director is paranoid about the money loss, marketing director is worried about the damaged reputation.
Yep.
And actually trying to plot something on a graph of likelihood versus impact was damn near impossible, because if I went to the finance director and said, okay, we've lost a USB pen drive and it's got all our data on it, he'd say, so what's pen drive? It costs about £2. We've got to get another one. Yeah, but we've lost the damaged reputation. And actually, to plot something on a graph-wise was damn near impossible. So what you ended up having to do is, okay, I'm going to look at this particular risk of a loss of USB pen drive, and I'm going to go to the person who I think it will impact the most. But all that does is skews your graph to everybody being overtly risk aware, but also risk averse. So you end up with a paranoid company, and they don't make risky decisions, which actually may prove flip 20 points might be I might be the millionth person to do it that day.
Yeah.
So you end up with a risk averse company, which actually cycles growth.
Yep.
Is there a way, or is there a thing that a business should do?
Yep.
Which takes that risk averseness in such a way and makes it more palatable for the business to take on board?
That's a fantastic question. So for those of you who didn't hear, so basically the question was, how can you take risk and how can you make it palatable? How can you make it possibly attractive to the business? With great difficulty. I think it depends on a couple of things. First of all, it depends on the people. And so if you take a business thing, for example, you might say, there'll be somebody who goes, we want to do this because it'll make us £1 million. And you go, well, yes, but you're not doing it right. Yes, but it'll make us £1 million. And you just end up in that conversation, and you end up getting overrun by it. And then, like I say, there are other people who will be like, they don't do anything because they don't want to be the person who agreed to the thing that then meant there was a negative impact. So I think there's a couple of things. So first of all is it's actually down to communication. It's about kind of working with people. So being able to sort of pick out those people. I think what you said about going to different people for different situations is good. But I think you also need to take an approach where you say, okay, well, who's the authority on this? So if you're in an organisation and you want to qualify database risk, who's the person that you can go to others and say, well, look, this person's reviewed it, they're the expert, and they think that this is good, this could be better, and this is problematic. And when you're faced with something like that, the idea that, people don't want to speak up against authority because they don't want to look silly. Similarly, I think you can always take the opposite view with somebody who's too confident, or in your opinion, too confident. Where you never ever want to be the person who cries wolf. Because if you're always there and you've always got your tinfoil hat on and you're always there going, oh, I don't know, oh, it's a bit risky, people will respond to that. And you'll always be seen as the negative one who always tries to stop everything, which is kind of what I really want to avoid. So it's finding what people respond to, being balanced. And if you think they're going too far one way or the other, just sort of matching them and just sort of tempering them. Ultimately, though, one of the big problems with risk is that you can't fix it. And you can't ever get to a point where you say... So I've said this in the past that to people, you can do it, but you will likely be fired if you do. That tends to turn their opinion fairly quickly. But that's a very rare situation to be in, where something is that bad, where you are just saying to everybody who'll listen, don't do this because it is stupid. If we go back to the barbecue thing, you want to do this. Why? Because I think it's cool. Well, okay, well, look, I've advised you, and we've gone through the pros and we've gone through the cons, and we've gone through mitigations, but look, if you want to do it, I can't stop you. Let the record show, but, ultimately, if somebody's willing to accept a risk, and if there is a mechanism in place to accept that risk, and it can be independently reviewed, I think as well, so you can say, okay, well, you think this, I think this group of people say yes, say no, everyone goes, okay, that's the decision. And sometimes you will get a situation like Sony where they go, well, why would we spend all this money on security? And then they get hacked. But it's always really easy to look at that in retrospect. Doing it there and then, you have to make the best decision with the data that you've got. And, if you're the one that's bought a load of servers and somebody goes, oh, what about Meltdown and Spectre? And you're like, oh, I thought it was going to be okay. But we didn't know. You just have to review that and go, okay, fine, move on. What do we do to remediate that? What's the next thing? Anything else? Anybody else?
I've had to assess a few things on that sort of graph.
Yep.
And I think that an awful lot of the time you're asked to provide a severity rating for or an impact rating for a particular risk and the likelihood.
Yeah.
And in reality, you can't do one of each. So I give an example of walking around your own house. What's the risk of injury?
Yeah.
So if I think probably nobody here who hasn't suffered some form of injury while walking around their own house at some point. So the likelihood is very high. We've probably all had some form of injury walking around the house. Equally, there are some people who've died in their own houses.
Yeah.
One of us here, obviously. Never succumbed to it myself. But this does happen. So your severity, your potential severity is very high.
Yeah.
Your likelihood is high. And all of a sudden, if you're not careful, you end up in the worry box, in a red box there, because both are potentially really high.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's actually a very small chance of you dying in your own house, and a very large chance of a very small impact. So actually, you've got two places, and they're probably both in your yellow boxes on there. It's opposite corners. But then you have to come along and present one likelihood and one risk, and that's a trivial example. But there are lots of other examples of real risks that you consider in business that fall like that. It's really difficult to give a single number.
It is. And again, it comes down to communication, because particularly if you're dealing with data, you can say, if somebody were to steal this bit of data, what's the impact? And you go, well, if they got that, then they'd also have to get that, they'd also have to get that, they'd also have to know that that happens, and they'd also have to have knowledge of this. So it all comes down to how you communicate it, where you say, it's not very likely. So in your scenario, you can say, well, you're right, it's likely that you'll get a small injury, it's unlikely that you'll get a large injury, but if you do, it could be bad. You can't round that down to a number, unfortunately. If you could, all of this talk would have been a lot shorter. But, so you say, okay, well, how do you communicate it? And how do you communicate it where not only do you sort of make those what-ifs and the maybes, but also you don't put too much weight on what you think the outcome is. Because I've done it myself, where I'm like, I think this is a bad idea. And you sort of read the document, and there's that much about why it's bad, and then there's a paragraph, a sentence at the bottom, which is, or it could be quite a good thing. You think, actually, I'm not being balanced here. So this is a blunt instrument. And I think sometimes picking a better way to communicate it for specific examples or for increasingly complex examples is a real skill. And yeah, it's communication.
It's almost like the graph shouldn't be a single data point anymore, because as you said before, with automation, the likelihood scale is changed, but actually still presented on the same graph. Like you should have the particular analogy of walking around the house. It's a low likelihood, but if it does, well, it's between here and here. So really, it shouldn't be a single data point. It should be almost like a line, or even a square or something on there instead. That should, for everything, to go back to the analogy, you can lose a USB pen drive. Reputationally, likelihood of it happening is probably still here, but severity is going to be up here, but financially it's going to be here. It should be a graph, line almost, rather than a single data point. I suppose that's where you're just thinking out loud. That's where should I now worry about this and mitigate against it in some financial kind of way? It would then probably be highlighted.
And you always have to apply a financial points on anything on a business to understand it. Yeah. Business understand risk, but they understand money more. If you say it's going to cost you £10, right, but potentially cost you £10,000, well then, hang on a second, then it's clear. So you've got to put the financial cost on everything.
So on the severity scale, I used to have 0, no impact to gain member. No solution, we shut the business. I didn't never put a financial severity. It took so many months of communication with your of actually trying to get them to understand the fact that it might cost you end your business. That £10 loss would end your business.
And I think it also depends who you're. Again, to go back to your original point, it also depends who you're dealing with and how they respond. You know. This is kind of the Donald Trump level of kind of risk analysis, but you're right. It can be a line, it can be a series of use cases over, whatever works for people. Some people are very visual, and this will work for them, and some people are very word driven, and they would rather you wrote a paragraph about it.
One thing you did mention was age and experience. Young people, teenagers are particularly known for being, take risks. The older you are, the less. I was a really crap analogy. I was a group of kids ice skating. I wouldn't go on the ice. I'd have knackered shoulders, if I fall over, I'm screwed. One kid fell over before he broke his ankle. 10 minutes later, he's back on. One girl broke. They're back on in 10 minutes. And again, in IT, if you've got a young developer with no experience, he's potentially likely to make more risks because he hasn't got that experience.
It's true.
So when you make a risk, your ability to judge risk is dependent on your age and experience as well.
But I think it's also worth looking at that from the other way around, where if you're a developer and you've made mistakes, you become increasingly risk averse because you don't want to make those mistakes you've made in the past. So you can actually end up in a situation, I think, where you get the young people who are like, well, why can't we do this now? Why can't we do it on a production system? And the older people who are going, oh no, that could cause an outage. And actually what you want is both of them to sort of do that. But you need to sort of be quite introspective, I think. And I think it's easy to sort of think, well, I'm right, you must be wrong. Sorry, I'm not pointing at you, I'm just making a generalization. When in fact, you can actually sort of go, actually, I'm part of the problem as well. So the more you think about risk holistically, I think the more you kind of become open to how other people can change, how you can change, how situations can change, and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think you're definitely right. I look at stuff I did when I was younger and I was like, why did I do that? There aren't any pictures of that in this, by the way.
I had somebody assessing risk that I categorised and decided that everything that was high impact had to be dealt with. And I said, no, it's rubbish. It's high impact and low likelihood. We shouldn't deal with it.
Yep.
Oh yes, you should deal with all of it. So I said, it was on the telephone. I said, are you sitting in an office at the moment? Yes. I said, what precautions have you taken about being hit by lightning? Well, none. I'm sitting in an office. That's why not. It's a high impact risk. Why haven't you dealt with it?
Yeah.
Well, it's not very likely to happen. So exactly. But that was what he was saying about that. Somebody's gone too far. And he was trying to make us mitigate all sorts of risks that were incredibly unlikely.
There is another version of this graph, which is similar concept, but it's for like productivity and time management, which is basically how important something is on one axis and how urgent it is on the other axis. And what they say is stuff that's top right corner you should deal with right now because it's important and it's urgent. Stuff that's in the yellow boxes, maybe you do it, maybe you delegate it, but keep it sort of in the back of your mind. Stuff that's in the green box, just don't bother. Because if it's not urgent and it's not important, why even think about it? And I think you can always sort of take the same view with that sometimes with the risk, where you say, no worries, fine, it's low risk, just we don't have the time, we don't have the people, we don't have the money, we can't fix all of this, because what's it going to give us? We're on that bit of the tall bit of the graph. So yeah, I think finding a way of at least categorising stuff in some way into these sort of different boxes can really help you sort of prioritise and give people a sense of purpose as well. Right, we're getting near to handover time. So, any more questions? I should do the Stephen Bonner thing. I should have like a tub of Ferrero Rocher. Right, if there's no more, thank you all very much.